Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, Counting from Caleb. My name is Ryan and this is my second video in my series on the 70 Weeks Decreed from Daniel. If you haven't seen the previous video, 70 Weeks Decreed, I suggest you do, as it gives the explanation and the basis of the entire 70 Weeks Decreed from Israel inheriting the Promised Land to entering the Millennial Kingdom. This 70 weeks being 70 weeks of Jubilee cycles totaling 3,430 years, or a 70 times 7 times 7 period. My theory being that this is the time period specified to complete the 70 weeks decreed on your people and holy city spoken of in Daniel 9:24 through 27. Within this time frame includes the first and second coming of our Messiah, Yeshua, his first coming being from the going forth of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, which was 69 total Shabuim, or weeks of years, integrated within this 70 total Shabuim, or weeks of Jubilee. He came right on time in his first coming, and he will return right on time in his second. This video and future videos will fill in each point of this timeline, showing how historical events occur right on schedule and follow God's timepiece of the yearly harvest cycle. It will validate the Sabbatical and 49-year Jubilee cycle and show how God's timing revolves around the Feast of Shavuot, or Pentecost, applied to the sowing and reaping of the harvest. In this video I'm going to explain where on the timeline the first temple built to Yahweh by Solomon occurred and followed the harvest cycle precisely to land on a year of Jubilee for its dedication. This is when God's presence came down and filled the temple in the 7th month in the year of Jubilee that Solomon waited for almost a year after completion of construction for, answering the reason why he waited that long. God will again come down and tabernacle with us in the year of Jubilee at the end of his allotted time. 2 Chronicles 7:1 through 2 says, "When Solomon had finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of Yahweh filled the temple, and the priests were unable to enter the house of Yahweh because the glory of Yahweh had filled it." His glory will once again return in the year of Jubilee, following the 70 weeks decreed. We learned in the first video that from the Exodus to entering the Promised Land was 40 years, and the timing for inheritance of the Promised Land was calculated from the spy's bad report in the second year after the Exodus to the inheritance by Caleb 45 years later, starting the 70 weeks decreed in the fall of 1400 BC. We learned that a Shabuah is a grouping of 7 units, with the final being a Sabbath. In a Jubilee cycle, this is 7 units of a week of years, making the 7th week of years the Sabbatical. I showed how the Jubilee cycle matches the Feast of Shavuot, or Pentecost, in years compared to days, placing the Jubilee at the location mirroring first fruits and Shavuot in the Feast of Weeks. This makes the Jubilee year both the 1st and 50th year, making them 49 years apart, creating an unbroken string of Shabuim, or weeks. We learned that the 70 weeks decreed is the completion of 70 weeks of Jubilee, with the 70th Jubilee beginning the 1,000-year Messianic Kingdom. In Exodus 12:1 through 2, Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month shall be to you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you." This will become important to us to understand future points of this timeline, as it will today, as you will see that the reign of Solomon follows the year beginning in the spring, in the month of Nisan, or Abib, when the barley becomes ready for harvest, and is the beginning of the year declared by Yahweh. Fisherman Sam and I did a deep dive into Leviticus 25, and how it is the instructions from Yahweh to Moses to make the first of the year the month of Nisan, or Abib, in the spring, that sets the timing of God's feasts, or Moed, God's appointed times for the year, and also how the Sabbatical and Jubilee years are incorporated for the land to rest. That will be a video all on its own, and is planned to be in the future. We learned that it was in the 480th year after the Exodus that the construction of the temple began, or 479 years plus 1 month. This would be from 1446 BC, or Hebrew year 2315. Adding 479 years, we arrive at 967 BC, Hebrew year 2794, for the beginning of construction. Now let's walk through the timing for the construction of the temple. First, Solomon begins his reign after David dies, Nisan 1, 970 BC, which is Hebrew year 2791. Solomon's years of reign are from Nisan to Nisan and are represented with the orange blocks, 6 months out of phase with the Tishri to Tishri year, represented by the gray blocks. It states in 1 Kings 6, 1-2 that construction of the temple began in Solomon's 4th year. The Hebrew word Bashanah is used here, meaning in the year, so after 3 complete years, but prior to completing the 4th year of his reign. So let's move forward into his 4th year of reign. Now to determine where in his 4th year of reign construction began, we count from the Exodus, which was in year 1446 BC, or Nisan 2315 Hebrew. It says in the 480th year after the Exodus, construction began in the 2nd month. The word B'Shemanim is used here, meaning in the 80th. So after 479 years, but prior to completing the 480th year. So we start at the Exodus and count forward from Hebrew year 2315 and add 479 years, and we arrive at Nisan 2794 Hebrew, or 967 BC. So now we can place the beginning of construction after 479 complete years from the Exodus and in the 2nd month, the month after Nisan, and in the 4th year of Solomon's reign. Now to find the completion and dedication date, we turn to 1 Kings 6:38, and it says that in Solomon's 11th year of reign, completion of building the temple occurred. The Hebrew word Bashanah is used here for in the year, meaning after 10 complete years, but before the completion of the 11th year. So we move forward to the 11th year of his reign, which begins Nisan 2801 Hebrew, or 960 BC. It says construction was completed in the 8th month of the 11th year of Solomon's reign. So now we know it took 7 complete years, or 7 years and 6 months to be exact, to construct the temple. The completion occurred in a blue block on our timeline, representing a sabbatical year. It then says that the temple was dedicated in the 7th month, which from completion in the 8th month is 11 months later. You can now see why Solomon waited till the 7th month, almost a year later, as it was the Yovel, or a year of Jubilee. On the 70 weeks timeline, construction took place in the 9th week of the 70 total weeks of Jubilee. It was dedicated on the 9th Jubilee from the inheritance of the Promised Land, beginning the 10th week in Daniel's 70 weeks. This is represented by the yellow in the 70 weeks of Jubilee chart, as we see here. Here's a close-up of the 9th and 10th week from the 70 weeks of Jubilee. You can see that construction began in the 2nd month of the 6th year of the 7th week of years, and was completed in the 8th month in the 7th year of the 7th week of years, making it a sabbatical year in the week of Jubilee cycle. Dedication of the temple then took place 11 months later in the 7th month at the announcement of the Jubilee on the 10th day, beginning the 10th Jubilee week out of 70 total weeks. The way a sabbatical or Shemitah year, as it is also known, is calculated is from a known anchor point prior to 6 years of sowing and reaping. The anchor point we are counting from, which as you learned in our first video, is Hebrew year 2361, which is the year of inheritance prior to the year when sowing of the land began. This is one of those instances that I brought up in the last video where our Western calendar is out of phase with the Hebrew calendar. Because the inheritance of the Promised Land occurred in the second half of Hebrew year 2361, from spring to fall, which would be 1400 BC, the beginning of the Hebrew year 2361 was in the fall of 1401 BC. So 1401 BC is where the counting begins for a 7-year cycle on our calendar. Our calculated date will be the year the temple was completed, which is 960 BC, or 2802 Hebrew. Using the Hebrew year is the easiest way to calculate the sabbatical and Jubilee years, as it is from Tishri to Tishri, following the sabbatical and Jubilee year. So 2802 minus 2361 equals 441 years. Let's first see if 441 is a sabbatical year. We divide 441 by 7, and it equals 63. So we know it is at least a sabbatical year. Now let's see if it also produces a year of Jubilee. We divide 441 by 49, and it equals 9. So now we know year 960 BC, or Hebrew year 2802, is a sabbatical year, and the year following, 959 BC, 2803, is a Jubilee year. So we've covered my theory of the 70 weeks of Daniel being 70 weeks of Jubilee in my first video, and in this video I've shown how the first temple built to Yahweh aligns with the sabbatical cycle and was dedicated in a year of Jubilee, or Yovel in Hebrew. Once again, this is just my theory and I may be wrong, but it appears God has placed events in history precisely along his timepiece, ticking forward to the end of the age and restoration of all things. I will continue to cover other events along my timeline in the future. Thank you for watching, and once again, time is short to the return of our King of Kings, Yeshua. Hallelujah. Shalom.